I was sitting at my kitchen table, halfway through a plate of scrambled eggs and hot sauce, when I noticed the dust cloud rising beyond the front gate. 3 black SUVs, all the same model, same tint, same self-importance, came tearing down the gravel drive like they owned the place. They didn't slow down at the gate. They didn't knock. They parked in formation like they were serving a warrant on national television. I stood up slowly. I wasn't in a hurry. I had nothing to hide. I had owned this land for 12 years, and not a single day of it came with an HOA. That was the point. That was the entire reason I bought the place after I retired. The doors opened. Out stepped 6 men. They wore navy blue tactical shirts with no clear agency patch, just a generic badge sewn crookedly onto the chest. They wore duty belts with zip ties, radios, and one even carried a holstered pistol that looked like it hadn't seen a range in years. One man barked, "Mark Reynolds?" I nodded. "You are under arrest for multiple violations of community code, including unauthorized livestock, land misuse, and failure to comply with HOA expansion ordinances. You are to come with us immediately." I didn't move. I just looked them over. The uniforms were wrong. No badge numbers. No agency. No printed names. The man who called out the charges had a laminated card that said Enforcement Liaison in Comic Sans. So I said nothing. I just tilted my head and walked slowly to the edge of my porch. They followed, barking orders like they were in a bootleg action film. But what they didn't know was that the man they came to arrest was not just a rancher with gray in his beard and dirt under his nails. They were standing on the land of a former Attorney General of the state of Missouri, a man who had spent his life prosecuting fraud, busting corruption, and watching arrogant men crumble under cross-examination. I knew real authority. I had worn the real badge. I had watched fakes try to bluff their way through depositions, and I knew what happened when they were backed into a legal corner. So I let them speak. I let them strut. And while they were busy acting, I walked over to my fence post and tapped the side twice. That was the signal. Hidden in the wood was a micro-lens camera that had already started streaming live to my secure cloud. Audio included. The men didn't notice. They were too busy trying to read me my fake rights from a sheet of notebook paper. I stepped down off the porch, my hands in full view. "You gentlemen have a warrant?" I asked. "We don't need one," the lead guy said. "You're in breach of civil codes. HOA jurisdiction overrides local enforcement for community violations." I smiled then. Not wide, just enough to feel the weight of the moment settle in. "Is that so?" I asked. He nodded. "Mind showing me your IDs?" I continued. He reached into his jacket and flashed something. It was a plastic badge. No seed, no barcode, no agency backing. I let out a soft breath. "Well," I said, "I suppose I should call someone." "No phone calls," he snapped. "You're coming with us." Now, that's when I turned toward the house, picked up the handset I had already laid on the railing, and pressed a button. A pre-programmed alert shot out to 3 numbers: my attorney, the sheriff, and my former chief investigator. I turned back around and said, "Gentlemen, I suggest you stay where you are. Help is on the way, and I hope for your sake, you're as official as you claim to be." They laughed at that. One guy even muttered something about old men and paranoia. I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because 5 minutes later, the real sheriff pulled up in a marked vehicle. And that's when things got interesting. You see, these men didn't just trespass. They impersonated law enforcement. They tried to arrest someone under fake charges on private land, with no jurisdiction and no legal authority. But the problem was they picked the wrong property. Because this time, the guy they targeted had written half the legal codes they were trying to fake. And I wasn't just going to press charges. I was going to bury them in them. Mark Reynolds hadn't planned on living a quiet life. He had earned it. After 3 decades in state service, including 2 terms as Attorney General of Missouri, he had dealt with more noise than most men care to hear in a lifetime. He had faced media storms, political crossfire, courtroom shouting matches, and backroom negotiations that would have shaken lesser men to pieces. But when his second term ended and his wife passed not long after, Mark did what many men only dreamed of. He disappeared into open land and clean air. The property was a stretch of 40 acres just outside the border of a town called Elkhorn Valley. Rolling pastures, a creek cutting through the edge. One barn, one cabin, and enough room to ride without seeing a fence. He bought it outright with the retirement package and personal savings he had never touched. Before he put a single boot on the porch, he spent 3 weeks confirming the parcel details, boundaries, zoning designations, and HOA records. He wasn't about to spend his final years arguing over mailbox height or lawn colors. His research was thorough. The county confirmed it. The title office confirmed it. Even the state GIS system showed the parcel colored in green. Unincorporated, rural, HOA-free land. Mark even requested a signed letter from the county assessor's office stating, in clear language, that his land fell outside all existing and proposed HOA boundaries. He filed that letter away in a fireproof safe. And for 5 years, it was heaven. He kept 2 horses for goats, a dog named Teddy, and more tomato vines than he could eat in one season. He wrote essays, ghostwrote a few legal articles for former colleagues, and spent most mornings on horseback and most afternoons with a shovel. It was hard work, sure, but it was real, honest, and his. No sirens, no courtrooms, just wind, wood, and earth. Then the letter came. It was slipped into his mailbox without postage, sealed in an envelope with a logo he didn't recognize. A stylized tree inside a circle with the words Heritage Grove Community Association. Inside was a formal notice. Dear resident, you are in violation of Community Code 7.3, unapproved fencing structure. As per HOA ordinances, all perimeter fencing must be approved by the aesthetic committee prior to construction. Mark read it 3 times before folding it neatly and placing it on his desk. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he went out to the back paddock and double-checked the fence he had repaired last fall for cedar posts and 2 steel gates. Nothing new, nothing fancy, just functional like everything else on the ranch. That night, he typed a letter and had his attorney notarize it. To whom it may concern, my property, identified as Parcel 38A on the Elkhorn Valley Registry, does not fall under the jurisdiction of Heritage Grove Community Association or any HOA listed within the state's municipal records. All land use is governed by county and state law, and any further notices of this kind will be treated as fraudulent correspondence. He sent the letter by certified mail and saved the receipt. That should have ended it, but it didn't. The next week, a second letter arrived, this one stamped final warning. It cited new violations: unregistered livestock, excessive brush, and visible utility tanks. The language was more aggressive. It listed a fine amount. It threatened additional enforcement action. Mark didn't waste time. He scanned the letter, added it to his digital records, and reported it to the sheriff's office. The deputy took his complaint, nodded politely, and said they'd keep an eye out. 3 days later, Mark saw a drone buzzing low across his west pasture. He watched from the porch as it hovered for a full minute over his barn roof, then drifted toward the chicken coop. It wasn't the first drone he had seen, but it was the first to fly that close. He traced its path back toward the tree-line, but whoever was piloting it stayed out of sight. He installed motion sensors that night. Over the following week, more oddities appeared. A neighbor, one he barely knew, mentioned seeing a man in khakis and a clipboard standing near Mark's southern fence line. Another neighbor said someone left HOA flyers on 3 other properties along the same county road. Mark knew the pattern. He had seen it before. This wasn't about landscaping. It was about creeping influence, about pushing where nobody had pushed before and hoping someone would be too tired, too poor, or too uninformed to fight back. Then came the visit. A silver Lexus pulled up at noon sharp. The man who stepped out wore loafers too clean for ranch land, sunglasses too dark for a cloudy day, and a smile that had survived too many real estate pitches. He introduced himself as Nathan Bell, Vice President of Policy and Community Expansion for the Heritage Grove HOA. Mark shook his hand politely and offered no seat. "We've been watching your land for some time," Nathan said. "We're impressed with how well you've maintained the boundary line. Your fencing work is exceptional." Mark didn't respond. Nathan continued, "I'd like to propose something. Not an enforcement action, just an opportunity. If you'd be willing to collaborate with us, we'd love to bring you in as an honorary advisor, legal consultant. Maybe even help us craft the framework for future community regulations. Your background is valuable. We respect that. Mark raised an eyebrow. And if I'm not interested? Nathan's smile barely faltered. Then I'm afraid the situation may become more complicated. We prefer not to escalate. Mark folded his arms. Son, I've written briefs that ruined senators. You want complicated? Keep coming down this road. Nathan's grin disappeared. He got back in the car without another word. Mark filed a formal complaint with the sheriff and sent a report to the county zoning office. But the unease had settled now. They weren't stopping. They were probing. 1 week later it happened. It was a Tuesday morning. Cold but clear. Mark was out feeding the goats when he heard tires crunching down the gravel. 3 black SUVs. Unmarked. Uniformed men stepped out, badges clipped to dark vests, hands on hips. They spread out across the property like they'd done it a dozen times before. The man in charge approached the porch and held out a document. Mr. Reynolds, you're under arrest. You've been cited for continued violation of HOA regulation, obstruction of enforcement, and unlawful use of restricted land. You'll need to come with us. Mark took the document, looked it over. No court seal, no issuing judge. Just a printout with the words Special Community Code Enforcement Mandate in bold letters. He looked up. Calm. You boys brought the wrong papers to the wrong address, he said. They didn't flinch. He asked for identification. They refused. He asked for a real warrant. They insisted they didn't need one. That's when he stepped back to his fence post, tapped the hidden camera again, and pressed the silent alert on his key fob. Within minutes, the sheriff was en route. His former deputy, now sheriff, knew this land well, knew Mark better. The men began shifting, eyes darting. Mark kept the camera focused. He asked one final question. Do you know what felony impersonation of an officer carries in this state? They didn't answer, but their body language told him everything he needed to know. And so, as the sirens approached and the sound of real justice began to echo down the road, Mark did what he did best. He stood his ground, calmly, legally, and without blinking, because the men standing in his driveway were not officers. They were pawns, and the person holding their leash had just made the biggest mistake of their career. The man in front of Mark looked like he had been pulled out of a catalog titled Tactical Weekender. Black boots with too much shine, nylon vest without a single scuff, a holstered weapon positioned like it had never been drawn. He held out a sheet of paper like it was supposed to end the conversation. You are hereby detained for community violations, the man repeated, louder now. Refusing to comply will be treated as obstruction. Mark didn't flinch. He took the paper with a gloved hand and scanned it. No seal, no docket number, no county clerk notation, just generic legal jargon on basic printer paper formatted like a bad internet scam. The header read, Special Enforcement Action, Heritage Grove Authority, followed by a string of allegations. Unauthorized structural modifications, unregulated livestock activity, environmental hazard creation, and the vague but familiar undermining community integrity. Mark folded the sheet in half and handed it back. You're going to need a real warrant. We are acting under HOA enforcement authority, the man replied. His jaw tightened. Mark glanced at the other men flanking the lead officer. None wore visible name tags. Their badges were sewn directly onto their shirts, stitched with the same logo as the letter he had received a month earlier. A hollow oak tree surrounded by a laurel wreath. But there was no badge number, no state identification, no law enforcement registry. Mark took a single step backward and spoke clearly. I am invoking my right to remain silent until presented with an actual legal warrant issued by a court of law. And I demand to see your law enforcement credentials, full identification, jurisdiction, and issuing agency. They didn't answer. He saw it then. The flicker of uncertainty, the sideways glances, the silent check to see who would break first. He had seen that look before, back when junior attorneys stepped into his office bluffing over missing files. Back when corporate liaisons tried to explain away campaign donations in exchange for policy drafts. It was the look of people who were used to bullying and had just realized they were standing on the wrong porch. Still silent, Mark casually reached behind the wood post that bordered his porch steps. His fingers curled around a small, smooth cord. He pulled it once, slowly. The camera inside the post activated, silently transmitting a high-definition feed, audio and video, to his cloud account, his attorney, and his former chief of staff, all on a pre-programmed distribution path titled Threat Protocol A. Then he slid his other hand into his pocket and pressed a flat, circular button on his key fob. No sound followed. No alarm. But 3 miles down the county road, the local sheriff's dispatcher was now reading an alert labeled Emergency. AG code read. Meanwhile, the fake officers were losing their composure. The leader stepped forward, more aggressively this time. "You don't want to make this difficult," he said. "You are not above the law." Mark's expression didn't change. "I'm not above the law," he said. "I helped write it. And if you take one more step onto this porch, I'll have you for criminal trespass, impersonating a public official, and unlawful detention." The man blinked. That was when the distant sirens started. Faint at first, just a low whine cutting through the silence of the hills. But they were coming fast. The men looked at one another, then back toward their vehicles. Mark crossed his arms and waited. By the time the real sheriff's department cruisers pulled onto the gravel road, red and blue lights painting the cedar fence line, the fake officers were already in motion, briskly walking back to their SUVs, voices low and panicked. But they didn't make it far. As the lead SUV reversed, its front wheels slammed into a metal barricade that had just risen from beneath the gravel, a hydraulic gate system Mark had installed the year prior, in case of wildfire evacuations and livestock control. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. The vehicle stopped hard. 2 other SUVs behind it braked too late and collided in a slow-motion crunch of bumpers and fenders. The deputies exited their patrol vehicles, weapons drawn but not raised, surrounding the scene with crisp, practiced movement. Mark raised a hand and called out. "They're impersonating officers," he said. "They presented false documents, attempted to execute a fake arrest, and trespassed on private property." The lead deputy nodded. He had worked under Mark back when Mark was still in office. The men in tactical uniforms froze. One tried to explain something about HOA enforcement contracts. Another mentioned civil authority jurisdiction. None of it made sense. None of it matched any actual legal code. Within 20 minutes, the SUVs had been searched. Inside one vehicle, deputies found a binder labeled Community Compliance Toolkit. It contained fake citations, pre-printed notice templates with blank names, multiple forged HOA seals, and half-completed forms titled Immediate Seizure Recommendation. In the back seat, one deputy found a duffel bag containing zip ties, 2 black masks, a can of pepper spray, and an unregistered firearm. Mark stood silently on his porch, arms folded, as the last of the fake cops were cuffed and read their actual rights. He waited until the vehicles pulled away before walking back inside. He opened his laptop. The camera feed had recorded everything. Full audio, close-range visuals, real-time timestamps. He clipped the section from first approach to the arrival of real officers and exported it to a folder labeled Evidence, HOA Fraud. Then he called Rochelle, his attorney. He didn't raise his voice, didn't pace, just explained what happened, where the footage was stored, and which statute codes were relevant. "Send it to your media contact," Rochelle said. "All of it. The press needs to see this before HOA lawyers try to spin it." Mark nodded. By sunset, the footage had been uploaded to 3 media outlets, posted on a private legal watchdog site, and submitted as part of an official incident report to the state attorney's office. By nightfall, the news had broken. HOA hires fake cops to arrest retired attorney general. The story spread like a grass fire. Cable networks picked it up. National commentators debated HOA overreach. A well-known legal blogger called it one of the most chilling examples of community power abuse in recent memory. Within 24 hours, Mark's inbox exploded. Some emails were from old colleagues. Some were from strangers. One was from a man in Utah who had been fined for putting solar panels on his barn. Another came from a single mother in Alabama who lost her house after an HOA lien was filed against her over a mailbox color violation. They all said the same thing. "Thank you." Mark didn't reply to most. He didn't have time. The county had already launched an investigation into the Heritage Grove Community Association. The FBI had requested statement. and the governor's office had called asking for a briefing. But Mark wasn't interested in politics anymore. He just wanted truth. He walked his land that evening like he always did. Teddy followed, tail wagging. The barn was quiet. The sun bled into the ridge. He stopped near the paddock gate, looked back at the house, and thought about what could have happened. If he had been anyone else, someone younger, less experienced, more afraid, what would they have done? Gone with them? Given up? Signed away something to make it stop? That was the real danger of power that hides behind fake badges and empty threats. And that was the fire that now burned behind his calm eyes. They thought he'd roll over because he was retired, but they forgot what he had retired from. Mark Reynolds never filed a lawsuit lightly, and this one was no exception. He had spent his entire professional life on the prosecuting side of the courtroom, carefully weighing intent, precedent, and impact before putting a name on paper. But what had happened on his land was not just a trespass or a mistake. It was a deliberate, orchestrated, and dangerous attempt to manipulate fear under the guise of authority. Within 72 hours of the incident, his legal team submitted a formal civil complaint to the county court listing charges of impersonation of law enforcement, criminal trespass, assault by intimidation, unlawful threat with a weapon, and malicious interference with personal liberty. In parallel, a federal complaint was filed citing fraud, conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law, and the use of private agents to carry out extrajudicial enforcement. The defendants included the known actors caught on his property and unknown entities associated with the Heritage Grove Community Association, a legal move that allowed Mark's team to draw the net wide enough to catch whoever was really pulling the strings. When the lawsuit became public record, Heritage Grove HOA immediately issued a public denial. Their statement was brief and sterile, claiming no involvement, no knowledge of the individuals involved, and expressing vague sympathy for the confusion and unfortunate misunderstanding. It might have worked had Mark not anticipated that very response. That same week, his legal assistant uploaded a confidential file to the court's evidence portal containing a leaked email chain between HOA President Karen Monroe and a committee group labeled Strategic Enforcement Subgroup. The emails, sent over the course of 4 weeks, discussed corrective enforcement options, deterrence initiatives, and specifically referenced Mark's property as a target for demonstration. One line from Karen herself read, "If Reynolds refuses to respond to formal warnings, we may need to execute a performance action to make an example. Authority presence is key. Use contractors. No uniforms with city branding." That single paragraph detonated like a legal grenade. News broke nationwide within 24 hours. Several media outlets picked up the story under headlines like, "HOA sends fake officers to retired AG's ranch," and "Community Association implicated in enforcement scandal." The footage from Mark's camera, his calm confrontation, the fake cops, the tactical uniforms, the plastic badge, circulated fast. Legal analysts dissected every second, pointing out the false badge identifiers, the unconstitutional demands, and the composed but devastating way Mark dismantled their fake authority in real time. The FBI, already in possession of preliminary evidence, escalated the case from local fraud to interstate conspiracy. Investigators seized HOA servers, phones, and office files. Federal subpoenas were issued. What they uncovered went far deeper than Mark had imagined. At the center of the operation was not just HOA leadership, but a well-connected real estate developer named Charles Vinn, who had recently purchased parcels adjacent to Mark's ranch and had quietly drafted proposals for a private luxury development labeled Grove Estates. The project's internal documents referred to necessary clearing of unregulated neighboring properties and outlined multiple strategies for compliance enforcement, including the use of temporary contract officers to demonstrate legal authority. Financial records showed that Vinn had donated over $50,000 to Heritage Grove HOA over the previous year and had personal communication with Karen Monroe on a weekly basis. Text messages recovered from Karen's phone confirmed coordination of the fake enforcement team, discussions of intimidation optics, and even celebration after Mark initially received the citation letter. He didn't respond. He's going to make this easy. But Mark did respond. And now the entire HOA was burning under the heat of federal scrutiny. Karen Monroe was arrested 2 weeks later. She was taken into custody at her suburban home and charged with 5 federal counts, including conspiracy to commit fraud, impersonation of law enforcement, civil rights violations, unlawful surveillance, and the use of coercion for land seizure. Cameras were waiting as she was led from her front door in handcuffs. Her attorney made no comment. Heritage Grove Community Association was dissolved within 30 days. Its assets frozen. Its board disbanded. The homes under its jurisdiction were notified that all HOA rules were suspended pending legal review. Some homeowners were relieved. Others were furious. But none of them could deny what had happened or that it had been rooted in ambition, control, and arrogance. Mark gave 2 interviews, one for state television, one for a national broadcast. He kept it simple both times. He said he had no interest in dismantling all HOAs, but he had every interest in dismantling unlawful abuse of power. He said, "You can't hide behind a clipboard and a fake badge and expect people to bow. Not in my country. Not on my land." The words were clipped and used across countless media outlets. He was called the ranch defender, the lawman of Elkhorn Valley, and the last honest prosecutor. An editorial in the New York Times referred to him as a rare example of institutional knowledge paired with backbone. Mark didn't care about the names. He cared that justice had been served. The court ruled in his favor on every count. He was awarded financial damages to cover the repairs, the emotional distress, and the legal costs, totaling just over $2.4 million. More importantly, the judge issued a permanent injunction barring any HOA or associated development company from operating within a 10-mile radius of his property for 25 years. The decision was applauded as one of the most aggressive judicial rebukes of HOA overreach in state history. The opinion was later published in a law journal under the title, Reynolds v. HOA, When Civil Codes Become Criminal Schemes. After the ruling, Mark went home, closed the front gate, and did what he had done every morning for the last decade. He made coffee, fed Teddy, sat on the porch. The air was crisp and clean. There were no SUVs, no drones, no letters in the mailbox. Just wind through the trees and silence, the kind earned through standing your ground when it matters most. He hadn't asked for this fight, but when it came to his land, his name, and his freedom, he had done exactly what needed to be done. And now, the land was quiet again, and this time it would stay that way. The sun had not yet cleared the ridge when Mark stepped out onto the porch with a mug of black coffee in his hand. The wood under his boots was still damp with morning dew, and the air was crisp, clean, quiet in a way only hard-earned places could be. He took a long sip, the steam rising gently past the lines etched into his face. He wasn't a young man, but the fight hadn't aged him. It had focused him. Across the yard, beyond the gate, and just beneath the glare of the first light, a new steel sign stood anchored deep into concrete, the letters tall and unmissable. And no trespassing, governed by law, not opinion. It hadn't been installed for vanity or vengeance. It was a message, a reminder, a line drawn not just in steel, but in memory. This place, his land, his sanctuary, had been challenged, invaded, manipulated, but had not been taken. And now it never would be. The world had moved on in some ways. The HOA was gone, legally dismantled and buried under injunctions and federal scrutiny. Karen Monroe had been processed through the federal court system, and though Mark hadn't followed every detail of her plea deal, he knew she would never again hold a position of authority. Charles Venn, the developer whose money had fueled the scheme, had been indicted on a cocktail of charges and fled to another state, his luxury project dissolved. His name now a cautionary tale in the real estate world. The media attention had eventually died down, replaced by new scandals, newer villains, and louder headlines. But in Elkhorn Valley, Mark Reynolds was not forgotten. People who had never dared speak up before started standing taller at community meetings. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down now nodded and stopped by with firm handshakes, baskets of fresh produce, or sometimes nothing more than a quiet thank you. They understood what had nearly been lost. Not just a ranch or a piece of rural land, but a principle, That property means something. That ownership matters. That no one, no board, no suit in a Lexus, no badge without a seal, could override the sovereignty of someone who knew the law and stood in it. The fight had taken months. It had pulled him back into the very world he had walked away from: paperwork, hearings, public statements, coordinated legal action. It had cost time, energy, and more patience than even he thought he still had. But it had also awakened something he didn't realize he missed: the precision of a legal takedown, the sound of truth cutting through noise, the difference between silence and submission. Karen had once said to him, "This will go away if you stop pushing." She had said it over the phone, calmly, like she was offering him a path to peace. What she didn't understand was that Mark didn't see peace as the absence of noise. He saw it as the presence of justice. And there is no justice in surrender. So he had answered her clearly. "Karen, I haven't even picked up speed yet." That quote had gone viral, turned into a soundbite, stitched into video edits and memes. But for Mark, it wasn't meant to be dramatic. It was a simple statement of fact. The wheels of the law turn slowly, but when driven by someone who built the damn machine, they turn with weight. Now, sitting on his porch, with Teddy asleep by the step and the barn roof glinting faintly in the sun, Mark could finally feel the stillness settle. Not the stillness of retreat, but of resolution. He didn't want to be a symbol. He hadn't started this to inspire anyone or to make a point. He had only wanted to protect what was his. But in doing that, he had given others permission to do the same. Across the country, his story had been told in town halls and legal workshops, cited in HOA reform proposals, and mentioned in law schools as a rare but powerful reminder that the line between civil code and civil abuse can be crossed quietly and must be pushed back loudly. He had received hundreds of letters, some handwritten, some typed, a few from people who had once worked inside HOAs and finally saw the rot for what it was. A judge in Oregon sent him a note saying, "You reminded me why I took the bench in the first place." A law student from Vermont had written, "Your case made me decide to pursue land use law. I want to be someone who stops this before it starts." Mark read them all, kept most in a box under the desk in his study. He didn't hang them, didn't quote them, but on days when he questioned whether it had all been worth the disruption, he would open that box, read a line or two, and remember what was at stake. The land had healed, too. The tire tracks were gone. The patch grass had grown back. The fencing had been reinforced, the cameras upgraded, the motion sensors reset, not out of paranoia, but as a statement. This was no longer a soft target, no longer a place someone could slide into under the guise of community concern or code enforcement. This was a fortress of truth, plain spoken and well defended. As the light climbed higher, Mark stood, stretched his back, and walked the length of the porch. He passed the framed copy of the court ruling inside the house, the one that listed every count, every charge, every declaration that his property was independent, private, and permanently exempt from all HOA claims. He stepped in his office for a moment to check messages. One from a state legislator, one from a rural landowner coalition, one from a filmmaker asking about documentary rights. He chuckled to himself and deleted the last one. He didn't need his story on a screen. It was already etched into land, law, and memory. He stepped back outside, coffee refreshed, the smell of soil and pine filling the air. Teddy lifted his head briefly, then dropped it again. Mark looked once more at the sign by the gate. It didn't just keep people out. It kept history in. They had come with badges that meant nothing, backed by threats that had no teeth, funded by greed, driven by arrogance, and masked by politeness. But when you've written the law yourself, you know exactly where to hit back. Not with rage, not with noise, but with precision, with truth, with calm that cuts deeper than chaos ever could. And now it was over. Not just the incident, not just a lawsuit, but the illusion that power can go unchecked if it looks official enough. That fear works better than fact. That men like Mark Reynolds would stay retired forever. They had tested the wrong man on the wrong day in the wrong place. And they paid the price. The land was quiet now. But behind that quiet, beneath the grass and gravel and steel, was something unshakable. A man who knew what was his and was willing to defend it until the law itself ran out of breath.